Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Zaccarini. I work in the Office of Civil and Community Services here at the Los Angeles Public Library. Welcome to today's program called Homeowners Know Your Rights. This program is brought to you by Public Counsel in the Los Angeles Public Library. Today, Nisha Kashyap from Public Counsel and Yolanda McClinton from the Neighbor Housing Services of LA County will cover the rights of homeowners who experienced financial hardship during the COVID-19 pandemic. They are at risk of default on the mortgage or are facing foreclosure. Ways to prevent foreclosure and how to access free funds available for homeowners who are behind on their mortgages will also be discussed. Please send us your questions throughout the program, and we have a brief Q&A after the presentation. Thank you, and take it away, Nisha.
Thank you, Caroline. Hello to everyone. My name is Nisha Kashyap. I am a staff attorney at Public Counsel. We are a nonprofit legal services organization based in Los Angeles, and we provide, among other things, foreclosure prevention legal services to low-income homeowners here in LA County. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Yolanda McClinton with the Neighborhood Housing Services of Los Angeles County, which also provides housing counseling services to homeowners at risk of foreclosure. And together we're going to be talking about your rights as a homeowner if you are at risk of foreclosure or behind on your mortgage to help you prevent from losing your home. Next slide, please. So here's the agenda that we're going to go over today. We're going to start out by just giving everyone some basic terms and definitions of those terms. We know that the foreclosure area is a really complicated one. There is a lot of terminology that many folks are unfamiliar with, so we want to make sure everybody's familiar with the terms that we're using. We'll then go over the basics of the foreclosure process, what the timeline looks like if you are facing foreclosure or in foreclosure. And then we'll talk about ways to avoid foreclosure, including ways that are specific to the recent COVID-19 crisis and financial hardship that arose out of the crisis. And then we'll be happy to take questions. I will note, since this presentation is being recorded, that the laws that we're going to be covering and the processes we'll be talking about are specific to California. And so they may not apply to homeowners who are outside of California or properties outside of California. Next slide, please. Yolanda, I'll turn it to you to go over some of the basic terms that viewers may need to know. Yolanda, I'm having trouble hearing you. You may just be muted.
Okay, can you hear me? Perfect. Okay, thank you, Nisha. And to the Public Library, we thank you for bringing this opportunity and this presentation to all of you that are here today virtually, because if we've learned anything over the last 2 years, it's how to adjust and be flexible in all that we do. And so we want you to know today that as we're sharing some information with you, that there's no judgment. Oftentimes, bad things happen to great people and no fault of your own. And so if you find yourself in a position where you're challenged with making the mortgage payments or you're not sure what to do, that's why we're here today, to give you a resource to let you know who to reach out to you and who's available to help you. So let's start with something really basic. And as it was said before, if you've got questions while we're presenting, put your information in the chat and then someone can respond to you in real time. And then if time permits at the end of the presentation, we'll do some more Q&A. So let's go over some basic terms. There's lender language out there that sometimes seems a bit intimidating, and we've got a reasonable sense of intelligence, right? And we understand some things, and we oftentimes nod in agreement, hoping that as someone continues to talk, we'll understand better. So we want to give you some basic as you speak with your servicer or a counselor or even public counsel, at least you have a foundation of basic lender language for you to go on. So here's some basic terms. If they talk to you about your mortgage servicer, and sometimes people will refer to it as your lender, just understand that this is the company that sends you your mortgage statement every single month and handles your day to day task of managing your loan. So on your mortgage statement, usually there's a phone number for someone you to call, and you're talking to the servicer. It may not be the same person or company that owns your loan because sometimes that's a different investor, but the servicer is the person that you communicate with about if you've got questions about your mortgage statement or if you've got challenges. Now, if you find yourself in a position where you're delinquent, this simply means that you're late on your payment, right? After that first 15 days, that you haven't made the payment, then you become delinquent. Your loan can also become delinquent if you've missed a payment or you don't make a payment in full by the due date. This does not automatically put you into foreclosure. It simply means that you're delinquent or you're late. Another term that we've become very familiar with over the last 2 years is forbearance. The government stepped right in at the beginning of the pandemic because the goal was not for anyone to find themselves in a position where they could potentially lose their home because either a loss of income or partial loss of income, but they wanted to find a way where they could temporarily suspend your payments or give you an opportunity to try to get back on track. So they offered something called a forbearance. This allows you to temporarily not pay the mortgage or offer it at a lower rate, and during the pandemic, we found that you could stop making your payment altogether for a specific period of time. They did not report it to the credit bureaus, nor did they charge you late charges. And people were able to do 90 days at a time and then possibly get an extension. We've seen people in forbearance for over a year, and still some might be experiencing some type of financial hardship still caused by the pandemic, and the servicer allowed them to be in forbearance. If so, that's great. But understand that during that forbearance period, there needs to be a plan. What is the next step going to be when you come out of it? Are you able to make the payments going forward if they're offering you some kind of solution? So, this is where we encourage you to have the conversation, even with the servicer, or contact a HUD certified counseling agency or contact public counsel just to find out what kind of resources are out there and available. And then finally, loss mitigation. When you hear that, it's the steps that the mortgage servicer takes to work out with you something to help you avoid foreclosure. So if you contact your servicer and you're saying, I'm having a challenge making the payments, or I know that I'm past due, but I can make the payments going forward, what kind of solutions are available? They'll have you talk to someone in loss mitigation, and they'll either give you several options, which we'll talk about in the presentation. But I just want you to understand that these are the basic terms: your mortgage servicer, if you're delinquent, which means you're past due, what the forbearance looks like, what is foreclosure, which is our next part of our presentation, and then loss mitigation. But just know that you've got lots of options here. Okay, Nisha?
Thanks, Yolandra. So now let's talk about just a little the foreclosure process itself. So first and foremost, what's important for folks to know in California is that most foreclosures are what we call non-judicial foreclosures, meaning that they do not go through the courts. What that means is that your mortgage servicer, the company that Yolandra just described, can go through the entire process of foreclosure, including selling your home, without ever having to involve the court system. And so we're going to talk about what that process looks like. As Yolandra mentioned, just because you fall behind on a monthly mortgage payment, just because you're late on a monthly mortgage payment, does not mean that you're already or automatically in foreclosure. Under federal law, a mortgage servicer cannot begin the formal foreclosure process until a borrower is more than 120 days delinquent. So 120 days behind on their mortgage payments. And that 120-day period between the first time a borrower falls behind and the start of the foreclosure process is a period we call pre-foreclosure. And the idea of pre-foreclosure is that it's an opportunity for the borrower and the servicer to try and work out solutions to avoid ever entering into the formal foreclosure process itself. I want to stress that if you are somebody who finds yourself in this pre-foreclosure period, you're behind on your mortgage, but you're not all the way 120 days behind yet, we recommend that you contact a HUD certified housing counselor as soon as possible to start talking about your options. What's a HUD certified housing counselor, you might ask? Housing counselors are agencies that have been certified by the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development to help borrowers who may be behind on their mortgage, may be in financial distress, may be concerned about making their mortgage payments, navigate this very complicated process. So what that means is that if you're behind on your mortgage, you're not alone. You don't have to work with your servicer on your own. There are resources to help you. And at the very end of the presentation, you'll see a resources slide that repeats this link. But there are HUD certified housing counselors located throughout this country. There are many here based in the Southern California area. And you can use the link on the slide to find a HUD certified housing counselor in your area that can help you understand for your particular situation, what are the options to try and avoid a foreclosure. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, before we get into the formal foreclosure process, we have this pre-foreclosure period of approximately 120 days. So that starts when the borrower falls behind on their payments. And what federal law requires is that between the time that the borrower first falls behind and the end of the 120 days, their mortgage servicer, the company that deals with their mortgage day to day, has to make multiple attempts to contact the borrower to discuss possible loss mitigation options, possible options to avoid the foreclosure. Now, I'm an attorney. I deal with these cases often. I cannot represent that this always happens the way it should, but I include this information for borrowers to know that during this time period after a borrower's fallen behind, the servicer is responsible for and should be reaching out to the borrower to help them understand what their options are. And so if you find yourself in this pre-foreclosure period and you aren't in touch with your servicer, if you haven't had a chance to speak to somebody at your servicing company that who can explain your options to you, it is definitely in your best interest to contact the servicer yourself and try and speak to somebody within the loss mitigation department to understand what options might be available to you. And then at the end of this 120-day period, the servicer has the option of recording something called a notice of default, which we'll discuss on the next slide. Next slide, please. So the recording of the document called a notice of default starts the formal foreclosure process. And again, I want to reiterate here, because folks may be watching this outside of California, this is the California specific process. In other states that the process may look different. Here in California, the notice of default is a document that is recorded on the property records, which means it's a public record. The earliest time the mortgage servicer can record this notice of default is 120 days after the borrower falls behind on their payments. And what the notice of default does is it kicks off the formal foreclosure process. The notice of default gives the borrower 3 months to cure or pay back or correct the default on the mortgage. In other words, the notice of default gives the borrower 3 months to address the delinquency or default on the mortgage. And a copy of this notice of default will be mailed to the borrower in addition to being recorded on the property records. This notice of default is important because not only does it start the formal foreclosure process, but it is also the first public notice that the property is in foreclosure. And so what my clients typically see is that once this notice of default is recorded, they're contacted by real estate agents, they're contacted by bankruptcy practitioners, they're contacted by all kinds of folks, because those people now know that this property is in foreclosure where they would not have known that before. We'll talk in a little bit about what those contacts may mean and how to avoid potential pitfalls and scams when it comes to those types of contacts. But the notice of default does put the whole world on notice that the property is in the formal foreclosure process. So as I mentioned, the notice of default gives the borrower 3 months to cure. And at the end of that 3-month period, there is the opportunity for the mortgage servicer to record a notice of sale. This is the notice that tells the borrower, and again, everyone else, because it's publicly recorded, tells the borrower that the property is to be sold. The notice of sale may be recorded at least 85 days after the notice of default, and that sale date must be another 20 days after the notice of sale. So this whole process from the notice of default to the sale, the fastest it can go is 3 months and 20 days. The notice of sale is also sent to the borrower, so the borrower has a copy of it, and the notice of sale says, of course, the time and the place of sale. Importantly, in California, up to 5 business days before the sale date, the borrower has the opportunity to submit what's called a full loss mitigation application. What this is it's a full application completed with all of the information requested by the servicer, seeking a formal modification of the loan, a change of the loan. And if the borrower does submit that full application within 5 business days before the sale, the servicer does have to temporarily halt the sale to evaluate that application. This is the absolute last moment, though, that a borrower can submit this. And I strongly recommend, and I think Yolanda would agree, that borrowers do not wait until this point to work with their servicer and apply for what options may be available to them. This is really just the absolute last time that you can do this. But it's very stressful. It's very stressful for the borrower. It doesn't necessarily lead to the best communications with the servicer. And so I encourage borrowers always, as early as possible in this process, even in the pre-foreclosure process, start working with their servicer. But California law does say 5 business days before the sale date, borrower can submit a full application and temporarily halt the sale. In addition, 5 business days before the sale date is also the last chance for the borrower to do something called reinstating the mortgage, which is basically paying back all of the past due payments and everything else that's owed on the mortgage. The foreclosure sale is the last chance for the borrower to redeem the property. This means paying off the loan entirely, not just paying off the past due amounts, but paying off the loan entirely. And then after the sale, once the property is sold, the borrower is no longer legally the homeowner of the property. Next slide, please. So I want to flag this because it comes up quite a bit. Foreclosure sales are postponed fairly regularly. Just because a borrower receives a notice of sale doesn't necessarily mean the property is going to be sold on that date. If the sale is postponed for at least 10 business days, the borrower must be notified in writing of the new sale date and time. If the sale is postponed for over a year, either because it's just postponed once for over 1 year, or if there are multiple shorter postponements that add up to a full year, any further foreclosure sale must start with a new notice of sale. So the servicer has to go back and record a new notice of sale to give the borrower a full 20 days. But any shorter postponements, all the borrower has to be notified of is in writing of the new sale date and time. Next slide, please. So I know that was a lot of information, so I tried to summarize it in this slide. So once again, just to recap, we have our pre-foreclosure period, which is the 120 days after a borrower first falls behind on their mortgage payments. This is a time for the borrower to try and work with the servicer to try and identify what options may be available for them. This is a really good time to start reaching out to HUD certified housing counselors or public counsel to figure out what options may be available. After the 120 days, the mortgage servicer can record what's called the notice of default, which kicks off the formal foreclosure process. That gives the borrower at least 3 months until the notice of sale is recorded, and the sale must take place at least 20 days after the notice of sale is recorded. So the whole process, we're looking at approximately 231 days if everything happens in the shortest amount of time possible. Next slide, please. So this is another thing I want to stress for folks because it can be very confusing. If, unfortunately, your property is sold at a foreclosure sale, that does not mean you immediately have to move out. You're not, even though you're no longer the legal owner, you don't have to leave that day or the very next day. You may have some options after a foreclosure sale, including negotiating something we call cash for keys. This is essentially a negotiated resolution with the company that now owns the property, where they give you a certain amount of time to move out and make some type of monetary payment to help you with the process of moving out and finding new housing. In exchange, you turn over the keys to the property and leave the property in good condition. If, however, after a foreclosure sale, the borrower and the new property owner don't come to some type of agreement, the new property owner who purchased the property at the foreclosure sale, does have the option to begin an eviction case to evict the borrower. We try and avoid this at all costs because there are really significant consequences to an eviction against you. But that is the kind of last resort for the new owner of the property to have the borrower leave the property. Okay. I will turn it back to Yolanda for options on how to avoid this entire foreclosure process. Thanks, Yolanda.
So let us just say here, there's nothing worse than doing nothing at all. Please don't let pride stand in the way of you reaching out for help. Have the conversation. Honestly, the servicer, the investor, doesn't want your house. They just want the payments or the money that they've loaned you in order to purchase it. And if you're living in California, especially, we know that we have seen the value of properties ascend so much until we don't want you to walk away from the property, either cash for keys or whatever the options are, just for the sake of you ran out of time. The majority of you probably have a considerable amount of equity in your property. And if so, and you've exhausted all other possible options, then let's talk about how you transition out of the property properly and then still be able to retain the equity that you have as cash for you to either start over or make another investment in the future. But don't just walk away from it or lose more from it by just not exiting the property properly. So when we talk about avoiding foreclosure, it goes back to our basics, right? Keep all the documents you receive from the mortgage servicer. Don't be afraid to open the envelopes. It's okay. You want to know what's going on. Oftentimes, I've seen clients that the servicer reached out to try to offer them a solution, but that fear stepped in and they were afraid to open up the envelopes and didn't even know that the option was right there before them. So, all your monthly statements, any notices that they might send you, letters about delinquency, foreclosures, or a solution. It's not always something negative. Sometimes it could be something very positive. And something we've learned this time around as compared to back in 2008 when we had a mortgage crisis. This time, servicers and lenders more than ever before are trying to work out some type of solution to help you remain in the property. So let's go back to loss mitigation. This is where they start to offer you different type of options. So we talked a bit about the forbearance. The forbearance again was a temporary halt of you having to make payments, pretty much like a freeze. And again, during this forbearance period, you did not accumulate additional late fees, nor was negative information reported to the credit bureaus. So your slate was pretty clean. They're trying to use that period of time for you to get back on track as far as maybe your income goes so that you can make a sustainable payment going forward. Now, if you come out of the forbearance and you still have an amount that's delinquent, maybe you haven't been able to pay for the last 3 to 6 months, they could offer you a repayment plan. That simply means that you could continue making the payments as normal, plus they would take whatever's past due, divide it over a period of time, maybe 6 months, 12 months, or longer, and they'd add that small portion to your regular payment in order for you to catch up. That is an option. We've heard some people say, I'm struggling making a regular payment, so the repayment plan really doesn't work out well for me. Then there's something called a deferral. We heard a lot of servicers say they're willing to defer what's past due. All this means is that, let's say that you owe them $27,000 over the period of time you haven't been able to pay. They've been more than willing to take the 27,000 and place it at the end of your existing loan and allow you to start to make the payments as though you were current moving forward. It's deferred, just like having student loans. The amount is deferred until a later period of time. And then, of course, the loan modification then reworks the entire loan that you have. So in the loan modification, they might be willing to extend the terms from 30 years to 40 years, or they might be willing to reduce your interest rate. You might 4%, they might be willing to go to 2.5 for a certain period of time and then increase it to 3, then to 3.5 to get you back on track. So the loan modification has a number of different features that could start you where you're comfortable and then get you where you need to be to put you back on track for the loan. So know that you have options. This is all about knowing your rights. If they don't offer it to you, if you call them, ask them what kind of options are available. And remember these and ask them, are any of these available for you? Now, refinance is another option. However, you would need to be current. So here is where, if you've been in a forbearance plan and they haven't reported any late payments, right? But you say that I can start to make the payments again, there might be an option for you to refinance. Now, I'd look at this very carefully because depending on what your current interest rate is and what rates are when you attempt to do this would make the decision about if it's a good time to refinance or not. We know over the last couple of years, we've seen interest rates at an all-time low in the 2% range, and we've seen them over the last few months start to really increase. So just look at the statement, talk to a professional, find out if refinancing would really be an option that would help you. And then, of course, as mentioned before, um, transitioning out of the property, meaning selling it. And so when you consider that option, I can't afford it. Maybe there were more than one income that helped you make the mortgage payment because of a loss, then maybe it's now just a single income. And so if you cannot maintain it or afford it, then selling the property is definitely an option. Again, remember I said you might have equity, so that might be a great thing. But what if you actually owe more than the property is worth? They referred to this as a short sale. So if you were attempting to get out of the loan and you had to sell the property for less, the servicer usually will take the loss. You're like, I don't have the ability to do anything else but sell the property. And then the seller will take control. I'm sorry, the servicer will take control and they will negotiate with whoever the potential buyers are for the amount. And what they're really trying to do is they're trying to cover the loan amount. So that's something that can be discussed. And then, of course, if you are in a reverse mortgage, and this is for seniors, then there are payment plans and other things that are available to you. But again, we encourage you to seek professional help, talk to a counselor or the public counsel about what kind of options and how that looks as it pertains to your reverse mortgage. Okay, Nika, back to you.
Thanks, Yolanda. And I'll just echo what she said on the reverse mortgage piece. We have found in our practice that reverse mortgage servicers in particular are not always the best at advising their borrowers about what options are available to them to avoid the loss of the home. But those options are out there. So again, if you're in a reverse mortgage, you're maybe having trouble keeping up with your property taxes or some other payment related to the reverse mortgage, please do reach out for assistance as soon as possible. I want to say a word about foreclosure rescue scams because this is something that I anticipate and frankly, we've already started to see coming out of the COVID crisis. Unfortunately, there are a lot of folks out there who may try and use the fact that a borrower is in foreclosure or at risk of foreclosure to run a scam, take title to the property. And all of the things that are on this slide are things that I personally have experienced, my clients personally have experienced, and that I've personally seen. So I just want to be very clear that this is very common. It happens to folks who consider themselves well-educated, sophisticated. And as Yolanda has said many times, and I absolutely echo, this is not about shame. This is not about blame. This is not about judgment. If you're in one of these situations, if you are worried that you might be in one of these situations, it's always best to reach out for help, and we'll have a resources slide at the end of the presentation. I don't want folks, feeling embarrassed about what might have happened and that being a barrier to reaching out for help, because there are things that can be done, but the sooner that you're able to speak to a professional, the better in these situations. So just some red flags to watch out for. Anyone who asks you to sign over title to your property or puts documents in front of you or asks you to go to a notary with them to sign over documents is almost certainly running a scam. It's very, very important to know that there are folks who are going to make promises about helping you make your payments, helping you get a loan, lending you money because they'll give you a better rate than a bank would or than a reverse mortgage company would, or somebody who says that, all you can use my credit to get a better loan or get a better rate. Those are almost always red flags, folks who are trying to kind of muscle in on your ownership, your property. And it's very important before you sign anything to run that paperwork by someone else to make sure that what you're being asked to sign is in fact legitimate. Similarly, bankruptcy is often advertised as a cure to foreclosure, will help you strip the lien, will help you take care of that mortgage that's on your property. But in reality, bankruptcy very, very, very rarely actually resolves a mortgage issue by making it go away. There may be certainly payment plan options through a bankruptcy. There may be options to kind of get caught up on your mortgage through a bankruptcy, but bankruptcy is not a cure-all to foreclosure. And part of the reason folks suggest that it's important or helpful to file for bankruptcy to avoid foreclosure is that at the time of filing for bankruptcy, there is something called an automatic stay that goes into effect. And so that in the short term, it does stop any impending foreclosure sale. But bankruptcy is not a magic wand. It will not make a mortgage debt disappear, and it will not make the lien on the property, importantly, disappear. And so again, if somebody's promising you that if they file for bankruptcy for you, it's going to take care of all your issues, take care of all your problems, I would be very skeptical about that. And again, talk to someone else. Public Counsel, for example, has a bankruptcy workshop and a bankruptcy clinic. We provide free bankruptcy services and consultation. So if you ever have any doubts, always feel free to contact us for a consultation. Okay.
So can I add one more thing
please.
in there with what she's saying about the foreclosure scams? And she just said it, free. Understand that getting the assistance shouldn't cost you. And so while she gave you a list of red flags, charging you for the service is also another one. So if you're contacting Public Counsel or if you're contacting a HUD certified agency, just know that we offer these services, the counseling, the assistance for free. It shouldn't cost you.
Absolutely, Landra. That's such an important point. Thank you for making that. So I want to spend the kind of few more minutes that we have before we turn to questions, first talking about COVID-specific options. So Yolanda did a great job running you through all of the various options to try and avoid foreclosure in general. I want to speak just for a few minutes about the options that are specific to folks who had some type of COVID-related hardship in the last 2 years, which is many of us, right? You maybe lost your job or had reduced hours and so you had reduced income, or you had increased expenses when if somebody moved back in with you because they lost their job, or you had to, suddenly take on more, financial responsibilities for one reason or another related to the pandemic. So there are a lot of COVID loss mitigation options available. The federal government, to its credit, has worked very hard to try and make sure that those options are available and easy to access so that homeowners do not lose their homes due to this, horrible once in a lifetime kind of unprecedented event that was the pandemic. So starting from the top, for COVID loss mitigation options, a first question that's important to ask about your mortgage is, do you have something called a federally backed mortgage? And what that term means essentially is that your mortgage falls in one of four main categories. The first is that it's insured by FHA. The second is that it is guaranteed by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, or your mortgage was made to you through the VA or the USDA. For folks who have VA and USDA mortgages, in my experience, they generally know that they have VA and USDA mortgages because that's how they got their mortgage in the first place. But for folks who may have an FHA insured or Fannie or Freddie loan, they don't always know necessarily if their mortgage loan falls in one of these categories. And so I've put some tools on the slides for how you can look it up. Fannie and Freddie actually have really good online lookup tools where you can just kind of pop in some basic information about your address and yourself, and they can pull it up. You can always contact your servicer as well and find out this information. And the reason that this is a key first question to ask is that your rights and your options for COVID-related foreclosure prevention and loss mitigation depend on what type of loan you have. So next slide, please. If you have one of these federally backed loans, Caroline, next slide, please. Thank you. If you have, too far. There you go. If you have one of these federally backed loans, you have COVID-specific options that generally fall into one of two categories. The first is if you're someone who experienced hardship during the pandemic, but is now back in a position where you can restart making your pre-COVID monthly payment. You couldn't make those payments during the pandemic, but now you're back on a position to do that. There are options where you can essentially take whatever you owed during the pandemic and put that amount at the end of the loan. So you don't have to pay extra to pay for it now. It goes on the end of the loan, and it doesn't even it doesn't accrue interest, and it doesn't come due, or you don't have to do anything with it until the end of the mortgage term, or if you sell or refinance the property. And this allows folks who've experienced temporary hardship but are back in a position to make their pre-COVID monthly payment just start making that regular monthly payment again without having to worry about the amounts that they may have been unable to pay during the pandemic. Conversely, for folks who can't make their pre-COVID monthly payment, all of these federally backed programs have options where you can essentially change the terms of your loan to seek a 20 to 25% reduction in your monthly payment. So as Yolanda mentioned, they'll change things like the interest rate, the length of the loan, things like that. They have set formulas, but what they're looking to do is help you reduce your monthly payment by 20 to 25%. And this is a good option for folks who experienced financial hardship during the pandemic and still have not been able to kind of get back to the financial position they were in before the pandemic started. This allows folks to keep making their monthly mortgage payments, but at a reduced amount. I want to highlight two things that are especially important for those of us who kind of lived through and experienced the 2008 financial crisis and all that came after it. Unlike the bad old days, let's call them, in this round of COVID loss mitigation for these types of programs, borrowers should not be asked to submit lots and lots of documents to access these options. You shouldn't be having to show your income, your pay stubs, your bank records. These are designed to be streamlined, low document, or in many cases, no document required options. And so if you're getting the runaround from a servicer, if you're somebody who had COVID-related hardship, you now want to get try and get that 20 to 25% reduction in your monthly payment, and you're getting lots of document requests from your servicing company, do feel free to reach out to a housing counselor or public counsel. We do not want to see folks get lost in kind of the document shuffle that happened the last time around. And in addition, Yolanda talked a lot about the COVID forbearance. The good news is that even if you didn't get on a COVID forbearance, even if during the pandemic you weren't making your payments, but you also weren't in any kind of formal COVID forbearance, you still can access these COVID loss mitigation options now. And we know that there are people who had COVID-related hardship, but just didn't get in a forbearance plan. That's okay. If you have, back mortgage payments that you owe due to COVID that you weren't able to pay during COVID, there are still options available for you. Next slide, please. So I talked about the federally backed mortgages, right? FHA, Fannie, Freddie, VA, and USDA. Those make up somewhere around 65 to 70% of the market generally. And so that leaves a whole bunch of folks who don't follow that category, who have private mortgages that aren't federally backed. So what are the options for those folks? The important thing to know is that there is no standard set of options for folks with private mortgages. It depends on your mortgage servicing company. It depends on who owns your loan, who the investors are in your loan. That does not mean, though, that you do not have options. Almost all, really, in my experience, all of these companies are going to have options available to help you avoid a foreclosure. And in particular, because so much of the mortgage market, because all of those federally backed mortgages, a vast majority of the market are using these types of options. In our experience, a lot of the private companies are essentially following what the federally backed mortgages are doing. And so even if you don't have a federally backed mortgage, you could expect to see some similar types of options as the federally backed mortgages. And so if you find yourself in a situation where you don't have a federally backed mortgage, you have a private mortgage, and you want to understand what your options are, there are processes to request that information. You can ask the servicer, what am I eligible for in my situation? And they're required to give you that information. And you can use that information to assess what might be the best option for you. The last thing I'll say is if you are getting any types of demands that, let's say I wasn't able to make my mortgage payment for 18 months during the pandemic, so I have this big chunk of money that I didn't pay and now owe. If I'm getting demands to pay back all of that all at once in a lump sum, that's a real concern. The servicer should not be asking for these payments in lump sum. The federal government's been very clear about that. And so if you're getting lump sum demands, do please reach out to one of our offices so that we can try and assist you. No one should be expected to pay a year and a half's worth of their mortgage all at once. That's just an unreasonable expectation for most people. Okay. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Yolanda to talk. This is kind of our last substantive topic before we turn it over to questions. But I want to give her a chance to talk about the Homeowner Assistance Fund, which is a specific fund that's been set up to help California homeowners who have COVID-related hardship.
Thank you, Nisha. And before I get to that, I just want to kind of go back to what she was saying about that private mortgage. So if you find yourself in a position where you don't fall into the categories that she talked about with VA, FHA, Fannie, Freddie, I just recently had a client had a hard money loan. She was at 10%. She was definitely past due, and she was in fear of losing her home. She came to us just to have the conversation to find out what kind of resources were out there. And as I transition into giving you some resources about funds that are available to help you, I want you to know that this hard money, I have to just keep saying because it seemed well, it is predatory, and they admitted it, right? Uh, while they don't have to play ball or adhere to the rules and the regulations that the other federally backed servicers or investors do, they were still willing to entertain the conversation because at the end of the day, the bottom line is they want the money. They don't really want the property. And they continue to say, we don't want her property. Again, a 10% um, interest only loan that they gave her, I think she had it like, it was a short period of time. And she didn't understand that when that period of time was exhausted, then the entire amount was due and payable all at once. So we were able to offer some assistance. We talked directly to the investors. Uh, and this is where I'm going into our next portion about the Homeowners Assistance Fund. The government has actually come up with a few different type of programs to help assist you. So while your servicer is either giving you one of those options we talked about, the forbearance, the deferral, the workout plan, a modification, there is still an opportunity for you to access funds that can be paid directly to your servicer on your behalf for the amount that you are delinquent. So, this one particular program, which is called the California Mortgage Relief Program, offers up to $80,000 in missed mortgage payments for eligible borrowers. Now, not the entire 80,000, it's whatever you're past due. So if it's 60 or 62, 67, but there are some guidelines that go along with that. So here's the criteria. The household income needs to be at or below 80% of their county's area median income. Now, here's where all the questions come in. What does that number look like? You can actually go to their website. It gives you a matrix. I don't think I have it here to tell you it's based on your household size and your income. And just a moment ago, Nisha was saying that they shouldn't ask you for an overwhelming amount of documentation. They're going based on what your income is now, not what you made 2 years ago, where you currently are, what your household size is, and then they will count that gross income. They'll also look at um, you have to be in a position where you've missed at least two mortgage payments prior to December 27th, 2021. Now, this is for things that are a result of you being affected during the pandemic, right? So at least two mortgage payments. You have to own a single family home, a condo, is also considered, and usually a townhouse is considered single family or permanently affixed manufactured home. So this is not necessarily for multiple units or investment properties. You have to have faced a pandemic related financial hardship after January 21st, 2020. So you know that this whole epidemic started, I think we did the safer at home order probably March. So anything from January 21st, 2020 all the way through December 27th, 2021. Anytime within that time frame, then that you're eligible. And so one of the following, receiving public assistance, severely housing burdened, meaning the cost of your mortgage or property taxes and other housing expenses are more than 40% of your income, or have an alternative mortgage workout option like a loan modification through the mortgage servicer. Also, with this program, you need to have already had a conversation with your servicer to find out if they're willing to offer you any type of resolution. You need to have exhausted every other option before applying for the California Mortgage Relief Program. And if you've already gotten a workout with your servicer, then that is the resolution, right? But if you still have questions about this, then know that you need to contact either of our agencies. The application process is online or through a HUD certified counseling agency. We don't apply for you, but we can help assist you in you applying. You can go online again and do it yourself. Funds are distributed directly to the servicer. They do not come to you, but the servicer also has to be signed up to participate in the program. So you can check the list of participating servicers. There is a link there on the next slide, please. So you'll see CaliforniaMortgageRelief.org and mortgage servicers, and that's where you can find out if your servicer is participating. The California program currently does not assist with your HOA fees, liens against the property, delinquent property taxes, or insurance unless they're already escrowed into your monthly payment or principal reduction. So just understand that if you are currently delinquent within the time period that we spoke about, you've already talked to your servicer, they haven't given you any options as a resolution to cure what you're past due, then the California Mortgage Relief Program might be something that you might want to consider. Call us, have a conversation, go to the website, and see if you're eligible for it. And can I also offer an additional resource, Nisha? Okay. So, in addition to the California Mortgage Relief Program, there was also one that was offered for the County of Los Angeles. The county. Now, there are a lot of different communities that make up the County of LA. The one portion that was excluded from it was the City of Los Angeles. It worked for every other portion or community of the County of Los Angeles except for LA City. They were offering up to $30,000 to help cure whatever was delinquent. Real simple process. Usually, if we get your information in, we review it, you're eligible, we could send the servicer the amount within 10 to 14 days. So for more information about that, you can always go to the NHS website, and we'll give that information to you in the chat as well. It's nhslacounty.org, or we have a workshop that talks about these other options every Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. via Zoom, or every Saturday morning at 11:30. And all of this, again, is virtual. So we'll be able to put that information in the chat for you. But just know that there are options out there for you. And there's another round of funds that are going to come available for the County of Los Angeles. And that one is going to also increase to $80,000. It's been a long time since we've been in this. So the $30,000 is probably no longer sufficient for the amount that you have past due. And that's why the amount is increasing. I can't emphasize enough. There's nothing worse than doing nothing at all. The money's out there and available. Please take advantage of it. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Yolanda. And as I've mentioned a few times, here's a slide with some resources, including our office. We do encourage you to reach out if you have questions or need assistance. And In addition to the workshops that Yolandra mentioned, I will also note that Public Counsel will be holding clinics with housing counselors 3 times a month, the second, third, and fourth Tuesday of every month in the afternoons. There's more information about it on our website, and so feel free to sign up for a clinic spot if you are interested. I think, Caroline, we've come right up on the end of the time that we were allotted. So if there's any questions, we're happy to take those.
I'm muted. Okay. Hi, everyone again. Okay, so let's see. I don't see any light. I have a few questions myself. So I'm wondering if I fell behind on my mortgage during the pandemic, what can I do?
Yeah, great question, Caroline. So, as Yolandra and I have said, the first and most important thing to do is figure out what your options are, and there are resources to help you. Right, you may be eligible for the HALF program that the state program. You also may be eligible for the local program that Yolandra discussed. And so, what I'd encourage is that if you want to kind of navigate it on your own, reach out to your mortgage servicer and find out what options are available to you. Or if you'd like assistance navigating the process of figuring out what resources are available to you, contact a HUD certified housing counselor in your area or contact Public Counsel if you are in LA County.
Thank you so much. I have another question. I just received a notice of default in the mail. Like, what can I do?
Sure. So, as we've talked about, the notice of default is the start of the formal foreclosure process. So once again, the advice is very similar in that, you're in the formal foreclosure process now, but you're not, on the eve of a sale date. So it's important to reach out to the resources that we've talked about for assistance. In addition, I will note that when the notice of default is recorded, when you receive it in the mail, it's usually it's the first public notice that the property is in foreclosure. So you may start to get letters in the mail, letters left at your front door, folks showing up to your house, trying to talk to you about options that you have. Just bring a skeptic's eye to all of those options. Be very careful about folks who promise things that sound too good to be true. I always tell my clients, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. There is no such thing as a magic wand that's going to resolve all the problems for you without you having to do anything. And so, if you ever have questions, if you're getting something in the mail that says, like, I'm not sure if this is real or not, you can always reach out to one of our offices for assistance. But that would be the other thing I'd really caution people to be careful about, because once that notice of default is recorded, it typically folks come out of the woodwork to talk to you about your house.
I can imagine, yes. I have one other question. I'm having trouble with my mortgage company. What can I do? What are my options?
Sure. So a few things, again, I'll keep, beating that drum. Reach out to a HUD certified housing counselor. Or in my experience, and Yolandra, you can kind of add on this. HUD certified housing counselors have relationships with the major mortgage companies. They work with them day in and day out. They, understand how to navigate their processes. And so if you're out there on your own, trying to get somebody on the phone, on hold all day long, not able to speak to the right person, getting the runaround, that's what a HUD certified housing counselor is really well equipped to help you with. The other thing I'll say is if you have concerns about how your mortgage company is treating you, there is always the option to file a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And here in California, we also have the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. These are government regulators of mortgages, and they want to know where the problems are. They want to know if you're being told things that are inaccurate, or if you're on hold for hours a day trying to get to somebody. So always feel free to submit those complaints. You can submit those complaints online. It's a very easy process. You don't need a lawyer to do it. And it often will help encourage the mortgage servicers to address those problems. Yolandra, is there anything else you wanted to add on any of these?
No, I think you just covered it all. Great.
Okay, let me see if there's any other questions that came in. Well, they're so quiet today. Okay, thank you both again for a wonderful presentation. I learned a lot. I wanted to also let everyone know that April is Financial Literacy Month. So starting next week, we have a month of streaming programs coming up. Next week's programs are on investing basics and financial planning 101. Some of the other workshops we have are budgeting, estate planning, financial elder abuse, and we have a savings program in Spanish. And it's on the calendar. So for more information on these programs and other programs at LAPL, all of our programs, lapl.org/what's on /calendar. So that's all I have. Thank you again so much. And have a great rest of your day, everybody. Bye bye.
Thanks. Take care.